For 3 millennia, the world's greatest archaeological mystery lay buried beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones. King Solomon, the wealthiest and wisest ruler in biblical history, vanished from the earth without a trace. No tomb, no monument, no grave marker, just silence. While his father, King David, has a traditional burial site visited by pilgrims for centuries, Solomon, the man who built the first temple and accumulated legendary wealth, simply disappeared from history. Where was he buried? What happened to his treasures? And why would the most celebrated king in Israelite history leave no archaeological footprint whatsoever? Generations of explorers searched in vain. Knights Templar dug beneath the Temple Mount. Victorian archaeologists scoured every hill around Jerusalem. Modern researchers mapped the city with cutting-edge technology. Nothing. The mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved forever, until a rainstorm changed everything. What emerged from beneath that rain-soaked hillside didn't just answer history's oldest question. It revealed something so shocking, so carefully hidden, that it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Today, we're going inside the sealed chamber that was never meant to be opened, to witness discoveries that are rewriting 3,000 years of history. This is the story of what they found when Solomon's tomb was finally opened. If you're drawn to mysteries history tried to erase, tap like and subscribe now, because what's about to be revealed was never meant for the world to see. The king who built an empire. To understand why this discovery matters, you need to know who Solomon actually was. Around 970 BCE, a young man, possibly still a teenager, inherited the throne from his warrior father, King David. The kingdom was united but unstable. The tribes of Israel had been fighting each other for generations. Solomon didn't just maintain what his father built. He transformed it into something extraordinary. His first temple took 7 years to construct. Cedar wood imported from Lebanon, gold panels that caught the desert sun, stone cut so precisely it barely needed mortar. The building became the spiritual center of the Israelite nation, housing the Ark of the Covenant itself. It was considered one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. But Solomon's ambitions reached far beyond Jerusalem's walls. His trade networks stretched across 3 continents. Ships sailed to mysterious lands the Bible calls Ophir and Tarshish, locations scholars still debate today. Africa, India, perhaps even Spain. These vessels returned loaded with ivory, gold, apes, and exotic goods that filled Solomon's treasury. In the Timnah Valley of southern Israel, archaeologists have confirmed that copper mines were operating during Solomon's era, churning out wealth on an industrial scale. The excavations there reveal sophisticated metallurgy that challenges our assumptions about Bronze Age capabilities. His reputation for wisdom became legendary across the ancient Near East. The famous story of 2 women claiming the same baby, where Solomon offered to cut the child in half to reveal the true mother, became a symbol of perfect justice. Leaders traveled from distant kingdoms just to test his intellect with riddles and philosophical questions. The Queen of Sheba journeyed over 1,000 miles with caravans loaded with spices, gold, and precious stones, specifically to challenge Solomon's famous wisdom. According to the biblical account, she left, declaring that the reports hadn't captured even half of his genius and wealth. This was a king who commanded respect from Egypt to Mesopotamia, a ruler whose wealth made him a legend in his own lifetime, a man whose influence shaped 3 major world religions. And then he died, and history went silent. The inexplicable disappearance. The Bible mentions Solomon's death in a single, devastating verse. 1 Kings 11:43 states simply, Solomon slept with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. That's it. No details, no location, no description of the funeral, no monument mentioned. For a king of Solomon's stature, this silence is absolutely deafening. Think about what's missing here. Ancient kings obsessed over their tombs. Egyptian pharaohs built pyramids visible from space. Mesopotamian rulers constructed ziggurats. Even lesser biblical kings have archaeological evidence of their burial sites. But Solomon, the wealthiest ruler in Israelite history, left nothing? The theories multiplied over centuries. Some historians suggested the tomb was destroyed during the Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE, when Jerusalem was razed and the temple burned. Others theorized it was deliberately hidden to protect its treasures from invaders, the Romans, the Crusaders, any of the dozen armies that marched through Jerusalem over the millennia. A few researchers whispered darker possibilities. What if the tomb contained secrets so dangerous they were never meant to be found? What if Solomon's legendary wisdom included knowledge that his advisors decided must die with him? For over 3,000 years, the greatest archaeological mystery in history remained cold. Dozens of excavations, hundreds of researchers, millions of dollars in funding, and nothing. Then a woman with an unusual approach made a breakthrough that nobody saw coming. The paper trail nobody noticed. Dr. Emily Carter wasn't looking for glory when she arrived in Jerusalem. She was looking for patterns. As an archaeologist specializing in ancient administrative systems, she understood something other researchers often missed. Bureaucracies leave trails, while others were scanning hillsides with ground-penetrating radar or excavating in the city of David for the 100th time. Dr. Carter was doing something that sounds almost boring. She was reading tax records, ancient Hebrew administrative documents, financial ledgers, resource allocation logs, the kind of brittle scrolls most archaeologists would glance at and move past, looking for something more exciting. But Dr. Carter saw something everyone else had missed. Buried in financial records from Solomon's era, she discovered payments, substantial amounts of resources, gold, cedar wood, skilled laborers being sent to a location that was deliberately left unnamed in the documents. Think about how strange that is. Ancient bureaucrats were obsessive record keepers. They documented everything. Every grain shipment, every tax payment, every construction project. That's how empires functioned. Accountability required documentation. But these particular payments, the destination field was blank, not damaged by time, not lost to deterioration, deliberately omitted. Someone in Solomon's administration was sending significant resources to a place they didn't want future readers to identify. The language around these entries was careful, almost evasive, the bureaucratic equivalent of looking over your shoulder while writing. Dr. Carter started cross-referencing every document from the same period she could access. She mapped geographical references. She tracked payment patterns across years, and slowly, fragment by fragment, a picture emerged. These mystery payments weren't random. They clustered around a specific timeline, the final years of Solomon's reign and the period immediately following his death. And the contextual clues, subtle references to terrain, distance from the temple, worker complaints about dangerous conditions pointed toward one specific area, a steep, hostile hillside in Silwan, just outside the ancient city of David. The hillside. Everyone avoided. Here's why that location matters. The city of David is one of the most excavated archaeological sites on Earth. Researchers have been digging there for over a century. Every major institution has sent teams. The ground has been scanned, surveyed, and studied from every conceivable angle. But this particular hillside in Silwan, almost completely untouched. The terrain was brutal, sharp limestone that destroyed equipment, unstable soil that threatened constant cave-ins, narrow access that made bringing in heavy machinery nearly impossible, and political sensitivities that made obtaining permits a nightmare that could take years. Previous archaeologists had looked at that slope, calculated the cost versus the minimal expected return, and walked away. There were easier places to dig with better chances of finding something significant. Dr. Carter didn't walk away. Her team arrived with state-of-the-art, ground-penetrating radar technology that could see through solid rock and map subsurface structures without breaking a single stone. They set up on that hostile slope and started scanning, day after day, week after week. The terrain fought them constantly. Equipment malfunctioned in the heat. Weather delayed progress. Political tensions created interruptions that cost precious time and funding. And for weeks, the radar showed nothing remarkable, just rock, soil, and the geological chaos you'd expect from a hillside eroding for 3,000 years. The team started to doubt. Maybe the paper trail was a dead end. Maybe those payments went somewhere else entirely, somewhere already destroyed by centuries of development. Maybe Dr. Carter had made connections that didn't actually exist, seeing patterns in random data. The whispers started, quiet conversations about when to call it and move on to more promising sites. Funding was limited. Time was running out. Then nature intervened. The storm that changed everything. A rainstorm hit Jerusalem. Sudden, violent, the kind of weather event that turns ancient streets into rivers and shifts earth that's been stable for centuries. When Dr. Carter's team returned to the site the next morning, the hillside had changed. Water had carved new channels through the soil. In one section of the slope, a shallow depression had appeared, a feature that definitely wasn't there the day before. At first glance, it looked like nothing special, just another scar in the landscape from water erosion. But something about it felt wrong to Dr. Carter. The shape was too regular, the edges too deliberate. It didn't match the natural geography. They repositioned the ground-penetrating radar directly over that depression and ran a new scan. What came back on the screens made everyone freeze. The readings weren't showing random geological formations. They were showing tunnels, straight lines, right angles, passages cutting deep into the hillside with unmistakable intentionality. This wasn't a natural cave system formed by water erosion over millennia. Someone had carved these passages deliberately and then hidden them so effectively that 3,000 years of history walked right past without noticing. But here's what sent chills through the entire team. The tunnel system wasn't just hidden, it was defended. The scans revealed false entrances designed to mislead intruders, dead-end passages that would trap anyone who took the wrong turn, and structural features that appeared specifically engineered to collapse if disturbed incorrectly. The entire system could destroy itself and everyone inside if someone tried to force their way through. This wasn't a tomb dug by people who hoped no one would find it. This was a tomb built by people who expected grave robbers and had engineered their failure with terrifying precision. Dr. Carter spent days studying fragments of inscriptions found near what appeared to be the main entrance. The symbols didn't announce anything. They didn't proclaim, "Here lies King Solomon," or promise treasure to brave explorers. Instead, they pointed subtly toward a concealed doorway, giving just enough information for someone who understood the sequence to recognize it. Everyone else would walk right past, just like generations of researchers had done. Standing on that rain-soaked hillside, equipment beeping with impossible readings, Dr. Carter understood something profound. The mystery of Solomon's lost tomb wasn't cold because the tomb didn't exist. It was cold because the people who built it were better at hiding things than anyone had given them credit for. Somewhere beneath her feet, past false passages and collapse triggers and 3 millennia of silence, something waited. Something sealed with such care, such engineering precision, that whoever closed it never intended for it to open again. The paper trail had led them here. The technology had revealed what the earth concealed. Now came the dangerous part. They had to get inside. Breaking the ancient seal. The stone slab blocking the entrance wasn't just heavy. It was part of an integrated defense system designed to destroy everything behind it if opened incorrectly. The team quickly realized that brute force would trigger collapse mechanisms built into the tunnel walls. This wasn't primitive construction. Whoever sealed this entrance understood engineering principles that wouldn't become common knowledge for centuries. Every false passage, every hidden trigger, every deliberately unstable section served a single purpose, ensuring that only someone who understood the system could proceed safely. Everyone else would die trying. Dr. Carter focused on faded Hebrew markings carved near the entrance. A sequence stood out. 7 lines, 7 symbols arranged in a pattern that seemed to connect to the first temple's 7-year construction timeline mentioned in the biblical text. This wasn't decoration, it was instruction. The carvings indicated a specific order of operations, a mechanical sequence that had to be followed precisely, or the entire structure would seal itself permanently, possibly killing anyone inside the tunnel. The team used laser mapping and 3D scanners to document every groove, every angle, every potential trigger mechanism. For 3 days, they worked in near silence, adjusting ancient stone components, millimeter by millimeter, holding their breath each time rock scraped against rock. The deeper they advanced, the heavier the air became. Dust that hadn't moved in millennia hung suspended in their flashlight beams. The tunnel walls showed absolutely no signs of previous entry, no torch marks from medieval explorers, no tool scratches from later periods, no graffiti from Roman soldiers or Crusader knights. Whatever they were approaching had remained completely untouched since the day it was sealed. Then the breakthrough came. A sharp crack echoed through the passage, followed by a deep rumble that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Several team members instinctively backed toward the entrance, fearing a collapse. But the stone slab was moving. Not smoothly, not quickly, but shifting, just enough to reveal a thin gap of absolute darkness beyond. No sound emerged from the opening. No rush of stale air. Just cold, patient blackness waiting on the other side of a boundary that hadn't been crossed in 3,000 years. Dr. Carter signaled for everyone to stop. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of the moment pressed down on them. The knowledge that whatever lay beyond that gap had been deliberately hidden by people who never intended it to be found. The seal was broken. History was breathing again. And what emerged from that darkness would shock the archaeological world. The treasure chamber. The flashlight beam caught gold, and time stopped. There was no gradual reveal, no slow recognition of what they were seeing. The moment light penetrated that sealed chamber, 3,000 years of darkness surrendered to a scene that looked like it belonged in scripture itself. The team stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow opening, flashlights trembling slightly in their hands, staring at something that transformed legend into undeniable physical reality. Golden vessels lined the stone walls, not replicas, not later additions. Original artifacts, their surfaces etched with ancient Hebrew script, their craftsmanship so precise they caught the flashlight beams as though polished yesterday. The air carried a scent that shouldn't exist. Ancient resins, spices that had been sealed in perfect darkness since before Rome was founded. Time itself seemed preserved in that chamber. At the far end stood something that made several team members gasp audibly. A 7-branched menorah rising from the floor. Solid gold, matching every historical description of what once stood in Solomon's temple. This wasn't a museum piece behind protective glass. This was potentially an original artifact that generations of scholars believed was lost forever when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Every direction revealed another layer of impossible wealth. Fragments of silk, faded but unmistakable, pointed to trade routes reaching India. Delicate ivory carvings suggested exchanges with African kingdoms. Small jewelry boxes, some still latched shut, contained earrings and chains set with emeralds, rubies, and lapis lazuli that would be worth millions today. One sealed clay jar, when carefully opened, released an aroma that seemed impossible. Saffron, frankincense, and something citrus, spices that smelled fresh after 3 millennia of perfect preservation in that sealed environment. The team documented everything with laser scanners and high-resolution cameras, knowing that a single careless movement could damage what the desert darkness had protected for 30 centuries. But not everything made immediate sense. Some artifacts bore symbols that didn't match known Hebrew or Canaanite writing systems. A few pieces showed stylistic elements that seemed anachronistic, either older than Solomon's era or influenced by cultures that, according to conventional history, shouldn't have had contact with ancient Israel. Had this chamber been accessed and resealed at some point in antiquity? Could later rulers have added their own treasures to a growing collection? The questions multiplied faster than answers. One archaeologist, overwhelmed by the scale of what surrounded them, leaned close to Dr. Carter and whispered, "This makes the British Museum look like a thrift shop." Nobody laughed. The weight was too heavy. This chamber held enough material evidence to rewrite our understanding of Bronze Age trade networks, Israelite wealth, and ancient craftsmanship. But even as the team catalogued treasures that would occupy scholars for decades, everyone sensed the same thing. This wasn't the final chamber. This was just the entrance, the vestibule. Whatever lay deeper into the complex had been buried there for a reason, and the clues carved into the walls suggested they were only beginning to understand why. The symbols that changed everything. The gold was breathtaking, but it was the writing on the walls that stopped the entire excavation. As flashlight beams swept across the stone surfaces, a cluster of carvings emerged that didn't belong to any known category of ancient Israelite art or writing. These weren't simple decorations or standard religious symbols. They seemed alive with meaning. Geometric patterns carved with precision that resembled architectural blueprints. Mathematical ratios that frankly shouldn't have existed in the 10th century BCE. And at the center of it all, carved with absolute precision, was a sharp, star-shaped seal. That seal matched ancient descriptions of Solomon's personal mark. Not merely a royal symbol like other kings used, but according to persistent legend, across multiple cultures, a powerful sigil associated with commanding supernatural forces. Medieval Jewish, Christian, and Islamic texts all reference something called the Seal of Solomon, and attributed to it extraordinary powers. Whether those legends held any truth, the physical seal carved into this wall was undeniably real, undeniably ancient, and undeniably connected to the king whose name had echoed through religious tradition for 3,000 years. The mathematical patterns surrounding the seal drew intense scrutiny. One archaeologist with a background in ancient mathematics studied them for hours before making an announcement that created immediate controversy. This is advanced geometry, ratios, and structural calculations that we associate with much later periods. Either our timeline for mathematical development is completely wrong, or Solomon had access to knowledge we don't fully understand. Stacked in a corner of the chamber sat clay tablets covered in dense Hebrew script. Some were worn by time, their edges crumbling. Others appeared so sharply engraved they looked almost fresh. One tablet detailed temple dimensions that matched the Book of First Kings nearly word for word, providing physical confirmation of biblical accounts that scholars had debated for centuries. Finally, archaeological evidence that corroborated scripture with stunning precision. But another tablet stood apart. Its language bent in unfamiliar directions. Its structure broke known grammatical rules. It read less like historical record and more like encoded instruction, referencing something called the key, connected to hidden knowledge. Dr. Carter recognized the reference immediately. Medieval manuscripts spoke of something called the Key of Solomon, a legendary text supposedly containing rituals, codes, and forbidden wisdom. Mainstream scholarship had always dismissed it as later fantasy, medieval fiction with no historical basis. But here, in a sealed chamber dating to Solomon's actual reign, the same terminology appeared carved in stone. Then someone noticed the chest. The sealed container, tucked into a shadowy alcove, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, sat a container roughly the size of a modern carry-on bag. Dense, heavy, sealed with metal latches that showed no corrosion despite the millennia. And carved across its surface was the same star symbol that dominated the chamber walls. The chest had no obvious hinges, no visible locks, no apparent mechanism for opening it. The design was intentionally seamless. The team gathered around without touching it. The air in the chamber seemed to grow heavier. Whatever this container held, the people who sealed this tomb had placed it here with extraordinary intention. They'd hidden it behind false passages, collapse triggers, and a defense system designed to kill intruders. They'd protected it with 3,000 years of perfect secrecy. What could be worth that level of security? Some team members speculated it might contain scrolls, perhaps the original wisdom texts attributed to Solomon, philosophical writings that later became the basis for the Book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Imagine finding Solomon's actual handwritten manuscripts. Others wondered if it connected somehow to the Ark of the Covenant, whose location remains history's greatest unsolved mystery. Could this chest contain records of where the Ark was hidden before the Babylonian invasion? The speculation was endless, but no one wanted to risk opening it in that environment. The consequences of damaging whatever was inside were too severe. The container would need to be transported to a controlled laboratory setting where it could be opened with proper equipment and documentation. But the discovery that truly ignited global firestorm of controversy wasn't the chest or the symbols. It was 5 lines of ancient Hebrew carved along the tomb's eastern wall, so worn by time they almost escaped notice. The inscription that divided the world. When Dr. Carter's team finally cleaned and translated the weathered inscription, the words read, "May wisdom guide my hand as stars guide sailors. The poetic structure matched the style of Proverbs perfectly. The language fits Solomon's era with remarkable precision. The reference to stars guiding navigation aligned with what we know about ancient Mediterranean seafaring. If authentic, this was the first physical, first-hand trace of Solomon's own voice, a personal inscription from a king who had become more myth than man over 3,000 years. The academic world exploded. Some scholars immediately declared it the definitive proof of Solomon's historical existence. For years, minimalist historians had argued that Solomon was either entirely fictional or heavily exaggerated in the biblical text. This inscription, if genuine, demolished that position, but others attacked just as quickly. The inscription seemed too perfect, too polished. Skeptics argued it could be a later imitation, perhaps from the Second Temple period, designed to look ancient. Maybe someone during the Babylonian exile or the Persian Restoration had created a memorial tomb to Solomon centuries after his death. No sound emerged from the opening. No rush of stale air. Just cold, patient blackness waiting on the other side of a boundary that hadn't been crossed in 3,000 years. Dr. Carter signaled for everyone to stop. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of the moment pressed down on them. The knowledge that whatever lay beyond that gap had been deliberately hidden by people who never intended it to be found. The seal was broken. History was breathing again. And what emerged from that darkness would shock the archaeological world. The treasure chamber. The flashlight beam caught gold, and time stopped. There was no gradual reveal, no slow recognition of what they were seeing. The moment light penetrated that sealed chamber, 3,000 years of darkness surrendered to a scene that looked like it belonged in Scripture itself. The team stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow opening, flashlights trembling slightly in their hands, staring at something that transformed legend into undeniable physical reality. Golden vessels lined the stone walls, not replicas, not later additions. Original artifacts, their surfaces etched with ancient Hebrew script, their craftsmanship so precise they caught the flashlight beams as though polished yesterday. The air carried a scent that shouldn't exist. Ancient resins, spices that had been sealed in perfect darkness since before Rome was founded. Time itself seemed preserved in that chamber. At the far end stood something that made several team members gasp audibly. A 7-branched menorah rising from the floor. Solid gold, matching every historical description of what once stood in Solomon's temple. This wasn't a museum piece behind protective glass. This was potentially an original artifact that generations of scholars believed was lost forever when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Every direction revealed another layer of impossible wealth. Fragments of silk, faded but unmistakable, pointed to trade routes reaching India. Delicate ivory carvings suggested exchanges with African kingdoms. Small jewelry boxes, some still latched shut, contained earrings and chains set with emeralds, rubies, and lapis lazuli that would be worth millions today. One sealed clay jar, when carefully opened, released an aroma that seemed impossible. Saffron, frankincense, and something citrus. Spices that smelled fresh after 3 millennia of perfect preservation in that sealed environment. The team documented everything with laser scanners and high-resolution cameras, knowing that a single careless movement could damage what the desert darkness had protected for 30 centuries. But not everything made immediate sense. Some artifacts bore symbols that didn't match known Hebrew or Canaanite writing systems. A few pieces showed stylistic elements that seemed anachronistic, either older than Solomon's era or influenced by cultures that, according to conventional history, shouldn't have had contact with ancient Israel. Had this chamber been accessed and resealed at some point in antiquity? Could later rulers have added their own treasures to a growing collection? The questions multiplied faster than answers. One archaeologist, overwhelmed by the scale of what surrounded them, leaned close to Dr. Carter and whispered, "This makes the British Museum look like a thrift shop." Nobody laughed. The weight was too heavy. This chamber held enough material evidence to rewrite our understanding of Bronze Age trade networks, Israelite wealth, and ancient craftsmanship. But even as the team catalogued treasures that would occupy scholars for decades, everyone sensed the same thing. This wasn't the final chamber. This was just the entrance, the vestibule. Whatever lay deeper into the complex had been buried there for a reason, and the clues carved into the walls suggested they were only beginning to understand why. The symbols that changed everything. The gold was breathtaking, but it was the writing on the walls that stopped the entire excavation. As flashlight beams swept across the stone surfaces, a cluster of carvings emerged that didn't belong to any known category of ancient Israelite art or writing. These weren't simple decorations or standard religious symbols. They seemed alive with meaning. Geometric patterns carved with precision that resembled architectural blueprints. Mathematical ratios that frankly shouldn't have existed in the 10th century BCE. And at the center of it all, carved with absolute precision, was a sharp, star-shaped seal. That seal matched ancient descriptions of Solomon's personal mark. Not merely a royal symbol like other kings used, but according to persistent legend, across multiple cultures, a powerful sigil associated with commanding supernatural forces. Medieval Jewish, Christian, and Islamic texts all reference something called the Seal of Solomon and attributed to it extraordinary powers. Debates erupted across universities, academic journals, and social media. Headlines ranged from Solomon found to holy hoax. Conferences were hastily organized. Research funding applications multiplied overnight. Carbon dating of organic materials in the chamber suggested a date consistent with the 10th century BCE, Solomon's traditional timeline. But critics pointed out that dating the chamber doesn't definitively date everything inside it. Ancient tombs were sometimes reused or modified centuries after their original construction. Dr. Carter remained measured in her public statements. "We didn't set out to find a king. We followed evidence. What we've discovered demands careful, rigorous study. If that's not worth investigating with open minds, nothing is." The chest remains sealed. As of today, that mysterious chest remains unopened. It sits in a climate-controlled facility, surrounded by the best security modern technology can provide. Teams of experts are developing protocols for opening it safely, using non-invasive scanning technology to peek inside without breaking ancient seals. What's inside, no one knows for certain. But the speculation continues. Could it contain the legendary wisdom texts, Solomon's own writings on philosophy, governance, and the natural world that made him famous across the ancient Near East? Could it hold maps or records of trade routes that stretched across 3 continents, revealing economic networks more sophisticated than we imagined? Could there be plans or descriptions of the First Temple, providing architectural details lost when Babylon burned Jerusalem? Or could it contain something else entirely? Knowledge the ancient world decided must be hidden. Wisdom considered too dangerous or too powerful for common access. The questions that remain. Beneath the stones of Jerusalem, A secret slept for 3,000 years. Treasures beyond imagination, inscriptions that challenge our understanding of history, and knowledge deliberately hidden from the world by people who took extraordinary measures to keep it secret. If this truly is Solomon's tomb, what does it reveal about the man behind the legend? About the kingdom he built? About the knowledge the ancient world possessed and then lost? That sealed chest holds answers, but it also raises profound questions that extend beyond archaeology into philosophy and ethics. If ancient people went to such extraordinary lengths to hide something, to build collapse mechanisms and false passages, and seal it away from every generation that followed, should we honor that secrecy? Or do we have an obligation to bring hidden knowledge to light, regardless of what those who came before intended? The debate continues, the research proceeds, and somewhere in a secure facility, that chest waits. After 3,000 years of perfect silence, Solomon's tomb has been opened. The treasures inside shocked everyone who saw them. The inscriptions challenge assumptions we've held for generations. But the greatest shock may still be waiting inside that sealed container. When it's finally opened, when its secrets are finally revealed after 3 millennia of darkness, will we be ready for what Solomon decided the world should never know? The story isn't over. Every stone, every artifact, every inscription reminds us that history still holds secrets capable of changing everything we thought we understood. And the question that haunts every researcher involved is this: what else is still hidden beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones, waiting for the right storm, the right researcher, the right moment to emerge and rewrite history once again?